mean, you're going to read a little bit of your work in progress, Polly?
It's very little bit.
Yes.
But it's quite hard reading out, if you're not like a poet playwright, obviously, reading out plays because you've got to do the voices. It's a bit weird. But I'll read out a tiny bit of it. It's the idea that my girl terrorist, Nala, has sort of shades of Prosper about her. In the sense of she's sort of talking about, you know, magic and transformation. So this is just a tiny bit.
Do you want to stand up to do it, or you?
I'll sit.
Okay.
Give you a little bit of context. So the family, she's got them hostage. She's revealed herself to be not quite the maid they thought she was. And she's tied them all up, and she's got her sidekick, a kind of Caliban child soldier character called Abdi, to go and get the jewelry box. So they're all tied up, the family, there's 4 of them. Abdi reappears with the jewelry box. Nala takes it, and she holds up a few necklaces. They glint in the light. Nala, were they gifts for your wife? Robert nods. That's nice. A gift is magic, isn't it? She thinks. The act of a gift, it's alchemy, the feeling made into an object, turning something you can't touch into something you can, something hard, something glinty. It can go the other way, that transformation. I stole something similar, and I turned it into, she rummages into the laundry bag. Ta-da! She pulls out a second gun from the laundry bag. It's a sawn-off AK-47. She examines it, then grins, friendly. It was a good deal, I think. Nala takes a ring off Vivian's finger. She holds it up to the light. Money is just more shit, isn't it? She pushes the ring into Robert's mouth. He swallows it. More magic. Money to shit, shit to a diamond shit, as big as the Ritz. That's it. I don't know if it makes much sense sort of out of context. But it's amazing, I think, to me, how 2 such different characters. I mean, you don't get much more different than a 17-year-old kind of armed robber, terrorist, and, you know, exiled duke. It doesn't, I don't know, but he's just so terribly human, I think. That's what moves me.
I wondered if we could talk then about how that follows from your earlier plays.
Yes.
Yes, because I've confessed to Polly that I've read her plays, but I haven't seen them. And I think one thing may be, people I know who've seen them always talk about how they're very funny. And I think that, is that good? That's good, isn't it? But I mean, I think that doesn't, it's more difficult when you read them to see that.
It's all in timing, isn't it?
Yes.
I think on stage. I think what you were saying really interestingly about the kind of disemboweled, that bit is, yeah, you never quite know. It's sort of rhythm, and quite often I find with playing with comedy on stage, you go quite hard and fast with the dirty, nasty stuff first. You take it somewhere, and then you do something funny, so everyone relaxes and the tension goes down. So you can go further the next time. I think comedy on stage is like conducting. It's actually a very useful tool. And I think, yeah, quite often on the page, you don't see the joke is funny because of the context it's in, if that makes sense. Yeah, you hear comedy more than you read it.
So let's. I mean, I think. So you're not going to read from the earlier plays, but I think it might be good. We're sort of, perhaps unfairly, I'm presuming that people here haven't seen. Has anybody here seen one of Polly's plays? Ah. Ooh, we've got some conversion to do.
I can just completely pretend.
Okay, so, yeah, of course. So, let's start with that face. So, it starts with a kind of torture scene in a way, doesn't it? Tell them how it starts.
Oh, you see, now describing that compared to what I just read to you.
Yeah, no.
There's a lot in between those 2 scenes. It sounds like that is just all I write. It begins with 2 girls at a boarding school. It's an initiation ceremony that goes wrong. So you've got these girls in really sort of cute pyjamas, and they've got their slippers, and then they've got a girl in cute pyjamas, but with a kind of pillow over her head. And they're doing sort of what seems like a harmless initiation ceremony. And then you realise halfway through that one of the girls, to sort of ease the process along, sort of it's in the middle of the night, no one can know, has given the girl quite a lot of Valium. And the girl's unconscious, and then this becomes the problem. And you realise this girl has access to all these prescription drugs, and they get caught, and she gets sent home. And it's almost like a prologue, because that leads to the actual action of the play, which is the girl gets sent home, and you realise her home life is a complete fucking mess. And you realise, sorry, excuse my language, where she got the prescription drugs from. And so, I don't know, I mean, there's an anti-hero in it, certainly, which I suppose is a Shakespearean concept kind of thing.
Tell them a bit more. I mean, why do you... Because the rest of the play takes place in a circumscribed space.
Yeah.
And in a way, it has some quite traditional sort of almost kitchen sink. Well, there is a sink in it, isn't there? Is there a sink in it?
I think there's a sink off stage.
Yes, off stage. Okay, but I mean, it's in a living space, which is reproduced on the stage.
It's in a bedroom. A lot of the action takes place around a bed, and I think the thing that was sort of the reason it went on, I think, when I was so young, and sort of stuff happened afterwards, was it's a play about quite wealthy, privileged people, but told in the royal court style, sort of more kitchen sink style. So it was a sort of clash of these two things, which was unintentional, but I think was slightly different at the time. And to me, it struck me at the theatre I was going to. I'm sure you're familiar with the theatre. It's in this incredibly wealthy part of London. Chelsea, I mean, there's sort of Tiffany's across the road, there's Hugo Boss, and the crowd is very well-heeled. And it seemed more from the not when I was growing up and going to this theatre that you were going to the Royal Court and you were quite often watching plays about, there was almost a pornography to it, maybe. You're watching plays about people of a different class, and then, but people, I don't know, there was something I started to find uncomfortable about the difference between the people watching the plays and what the plays were about. So it became interesting to me to write a play in that style, but very much about the people who were watching it, kind of thing. So that's sort of how I started.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because the Royal Court, I don't know if as a German audience you're aware of it, does have that kind of peculiar and special and sometimes laughed at role in kind of London and national cultural life as the place where you pay to be shocked in some sense, you know, and that's part of the pleasure. That's part of the pleasure, and actually it's kind of sometimes that's funny, but sometimes that's good too, because sometimes shock is one of the things theatre uses. But there's some shocks in your first play, aren't there?
I haven't looked at that one in so long. It's quite weird.
But I mean, there is. So, for instance, we have the kind of prologue scene, as you describe it, where Martha, isn't it, the girl? No, Martha's the mother.
Martha's the mother. Yeah.
Where her daughter Mia is taking part with her friend in this initiation rite that goes wrong, and then we go to the flat, and it becomes clear that Martha and her son, Henry, have some kind of relationship. It's never explicit, but they have a kind of strange, her and her sort of the mother and the 17-year-old son kind of live in this flat together, and they have this slightly codependent relationship where she's an alcoholic and he looks after her. And it's sort of like a bad marriage. I mean, various people always ask me, you know, is there more to it than that? But that's sort of up to each audience member, isn't it? But you never really know. No. But there's something quite sort of strange. It's like the flat's a sort of small, its own country. I'm very interested in that, in spaces that are unpoliced, you know. Like the rooms you never get to go into that have their own laws. Much like the island in The Tempest, its own laws. I think there's something interesting dramatically when there is no authority and the curtains are closed.
And I think that's why theatre is such a good medium for exploring those kind of strange relationships, because you are in the room with them and you cannot leave.
Yeah.
I love that.
And in both the first two plays,
Yeah.
a kind of, I was going to say family unit, but a sort of shattered a strange family unit. In the second play, Tuss, there's no parents. Has kind of formed its own weird habits and way of living, which includes things like, you know, eating only crisps or swapping, you know,
I just think I'm very interested in the kind of animalistic side of human nature and how, you know, what you'd really do when no one's looking at you. Do you know what I mean? I think there's something really interesting there. And to a degree, every single play of mine is looking at that same thing, sort of how far will you go? At what point? About your own moral compass and authority. I don't know. It's sort of, and my second play is about a group of children, a 7-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 15-year-old siblings, and they're in this flat, and they're sort of having quite a nice time, and then you slowly realise, you know, oh God, there's no parents. Why? And then slowly realise they've been waiting for their mother to return for a very long time, and she just hasn't come back, and the older siblings look after the little boy. And one of the siblings thinks, we're just going to wait. She's going to come back. It's going to be fine. Because if we tell anyone, we'll be taken into care. And the girl is of the thinks they should go into care. So it actually becomes a battle between those two about what they think family is and how long you should wait for someone you love and that kind of thing. I mean, they sound bleak. They are funny, I think. But that, again, how you behave when all the rules are off. Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed the one instruction that the second one, Tuss has at the beginning of it on the cast list, or the list of characters, not the cast list, is the stipulation that I gather was obeyed when it was performed, which was that the actors be the same age as the characters.
Yes. Which means you need sort of several of the younger actors.
Which means you need a 7-year-old.
We had a 9-year-old. We had two 9-year-olds play him, and you rotate the 9-year-old. But there's something about, I think, actors' bodies where you could have a 24-year-old play the 14-year-old. That happens a lot. But there's something about the sort of the sexuality of someone who is a certain age. The way they move is different from an adolescent. And we had two 16-year-olds playing those parts. They were brilliant. But there's a vulnerability and an uncertainness in your body that you can't fake, especially when you're forensically close, which is how I like to have that one performed. It's quite small.
What about the 9-year-old playing Finn?
He was great.
I'm sure he was. I mean, I read reviews saying he was great, but I mean, how did they find it? Because it's so often I've seen plays which have a child in, and the child, it's so obvious it's a child has been brought on to do it, as it were, you know, and children, and you think, children can't act.
Oh, children can act.
Yeah, but yes, but can they act to a script? But obviously this child...
Well, what's interesting is the first thing that's brilliant about having a kid on stage is it's immediately transgressive. It's like, it's your bedtime. What are you doing? Why are you here? This is already quite interesting. And there's a big stunt in the middle of the play where the little boy, it's just before the interval, they're playing a game and he's running around, he tries to reach a light and he reaches and he falls. And we tricked it so that the fall looked awful, but in fact there was a mattress and everything. And there's this sort of smash and this crash and he screamed. He pulled him up and his blood kind of running down from his face. And I've never seen a reaction like it. People were like, because seeing a bleeding child sort of 4 or 5 feet in front of you if you're in the front row, screaming, "Mummy, mummy," your animal instinct is, you forget it's an actor, you just get me to that kid. It was great because then we blacked it out and that was the interval, so I was like, and yeah. But I think, much like animals, it lends something different to it, doesn't it? But sorry, I digress. We had 2 Finns. We had good Finn and bad Finn. So it would rotate. So there was one actor who we preferred slightly. And that, I think, was actually very much down to the parents. His parents were incredibly chilled. And other Finn's parents were actually incredibly tense. And if you have tense parents and you're a stage school kid, you're not going to be as relaxed. Whereas relaxed Finn just was the best thing in it. He ruled the roost.
But it's transgressive in another way, because in the play, in the script, Finn says things, doesn't he, which he doesn't sort of understand sometimes, but which he's kind of learnt from hearing the voices around him. So I just remember there's a bit in both the first plays, a kind of in both That Face and Tuss Tuss, adult comes in towards the end of the play, but not actually like in Lord of the Flies to restore authority, but actually to introduce new chaos, really. And in Tuss Tuss, what's his name? Is it Roland?
Yeah.
Roland says something. Oh, you've been having a party, and Finn's go and Elliot says, yes, we're having a great time or something. I'm sorry, I can't remember the words, but I remember what Finn says. He says, yeah, kinky.
Yeah, yeah, he does.
And it's that thing that children say where suddenly adults either stiffen or laugh, depending on how transgressive it is. And it's something that the child doesn't understand, so it's funny. But they must have heard. They must have heard from somewhere. And of course, the play and the previous play, they are a bit kinky, actually. What's going on is a bit kinky. And so having a child actor saying these things is sort of, it's doubly transgressive, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, children are such... I mean, writing a 7-year-old was just the best fun, because the sort of creative freedom they have with language themselves, and this sort of... I don't know, they will be the person to say the thing you're not meant to say, which is so useful, actually, in a scene. But, yeah, definitely fun. I'd love to write... Maybe like just a straight-up children's play. That'd be fun.
Have you ever seen that Dennis Potter play, The Blue Remembered Hills? Fantastic, fantastic.
Oh, no, I have.
Yeah, you have. It was on a television play.
Yeah.
And it's all about children. And it does have a Lord of the Flies aspect to it. And the children are played by adults. And it's sort of, it's like a lens in a way. The weird thing of having them played by adults is, and they're dressed as children. And it's sort of, you think, oh, ridiculous. And it is ridiculous. But actually, it's a kind of a lens that focuses what's in what children say. You hear it more somehow because it's kind of Colin Welland, age 40, in shorts, kind of, saying these either, absolutely desolate or cruel things that children say.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, we like to give away the endings of these plays at all? No. Okay. We're not allowed to talk about what happens when the adult comes in at the end. Okay, well, then tell us. Oh, I want you to do that. No.
Okay, you can if you want.
No. It's fine. It's fine. I wanted to talk a bit ask you a bit about writing dialogue, because we were talking a bit about that earlier. Because you were saying things which aren't funny on the page, can be funny on the stage because of the kind of rhythm of it. And there is one, I'll tell you now, I'll give you a giveaway secret, what Polly's favourite stage direction is. Do you know what your favourite stage direction is? The one you use most often?
Oh, God,
no,
what is it?
You don't know.
No.
I haven't ever seen it before, but I'm sure other playwrights have used it before. It's the word beat.
Oh, yes, beat.
Beat.
A friend of mine read a play of mine and said he imagined that there was a drum.
Yes.
And every time I'd written beat, some guy on the stage with the drum was just done a little tap.
It is the most common stage direction.
It's incredibly
Occasionally
useful.
you say heavy pause, but mostly
beat.
You say, Henry, you're in trouble, aren't you? You did something. Beat. And you don't look sick.
It's really, really useful because, well, I suppose it varies writer to writer, but I find because my writing it's not quite realism, I suppose it's naturalism, just ever so slightly heightened, but still could plausibly be a normal conversation. So the beat of time pauses really help certain things land. I mean, I don't think about why I never put them in later, but there's sort of sometimes you need a moment before you continue for something to, like I was saying, sometimes a scene is like a system of jumps for an actor, and if you get the timing wrong and fall at a certain jump, you're going to mess the jump up, the big jump later. So I suppose it's almost a sort of a template to guide it, because I'll have my eye on a greater rhythm later, if that makes sense. I think that was quite convoluted. But so the beat is sort of the real craft part for me, the slight musicality of it, and the fact that you're building to something, I think.
And is it also a naturalistic thing? Is it something that is important that you hear in dialogue around you? Do you write like that? Do you hear things in your head that you've heard around you?
Well,
I was just thinking, I open it at random. Okay, this is at random, and Henry, Mia's brother, is berating her for having taken the mum's pills. The mum's Martha's a pill addict, and she's taken the pills to do this school jape, and he says, he chucks a bottle of pills on the bed. You took them from here. Mia, sorry, beat. Sod that, I'm not.
See, that's a really good example of the difference, going, sorry, and a small pause, yeah, sorry, sod that, I'm not. Sorry, sod that, I'm not. It's a different intention completely. So actually that tiny, tiny just beat of time can change the intention of an entire sentence. So and then a heavy pause is obviously sort of completely different. Also, which is perhaps less obvious on the page, what I use a lot is a slash. So to indicate when sentences overlap and there's more of a sort of chaotic, interrupting, kind of, a bit dirtier conversational style when people are panicked or they're arguing or something. So I think these little sort of tools are very useful, because ultimately you're sort of an architect when you're writing a play. I mean, it's only the text. Eventually a whole load of lights and actors and everything have to hang off this quite fragile building of words you have made. So you've got to be seriously careful, I think, to bridge things and link them correctly. Because you have a big responsibility, because some poor actors are going to have to actually stand there and do it in front of people. So
you have people sometimes talking at the same time? Because I've noticed that, who knows if Shakespeare ever intended for people to do that, but people never talk at the same time. In a Shakespeare script, apparently, they may interrupt each other. And I always have that experience if I go to see a play, and if I don't know the play, and two characters do what people do in life a lot, which is simply talk simultaneously, not interrupt and the first person stops and lets the other take over. But they actually talk simultaneously. And whenever it happens on the stage, I think, oh God, are the actors getting this wrong? Is this a cock-up? Because that's not how drama works. People never talk simultaneously. That's how conversation works, but not drama. But you make people talk over each other, do you?
I think actually in Tuss, there's a bit that's, after I described the boy falling, there's a bit of dialogue there where the slashes are in halfway through the sentences. So they're sort of thinking, God, do we call the police, or what do we do? And in fact, they can't, because if they take him to hospital, they'll be rumbled and they will be taken into care. So they're in this horrible position where it's patch him up ourselves and hope for the best, or take it for hospital, be split up. So it's tense, but to sort of signify that panic, you can be like, shall we take him to hospital? Beat. It's trying to, mimic, the rhythm of language, the emotion, isn't it? Sort of the real fear. And I wanted it to be disorientating and scary, like it really would be. So the words jumble and overlap. That's a particular bit I remember doing that. It depends, because you're quickening stuff and slowing stuff down at all times. I think there's a musical element to dialogue, a sort of conducting, like I was saying earlier, because it's ultimately spoken sound, isn't it?
And do you think, the material that you're using in your play, do you ever think, that interesting, you're talking about the royal court, that the very venue was kind of in your mind, thinking about what you were writing about. Do you now sort of hanker to escape that sense that there must be some expectation of some frisson of shock attached to going to see a new play?
Well, my first 3 plays were all on at the Royal Court, and now my new play is going on at the National. So there's like it's like a producing house of theatre, and there's a certain degree that you're expected to, you become part of this group. And the Royal Court, certainly it is that whole right to fail, right to shock, yada yada. And then the National's just sort of the National, isn't it? It's all sorts of things. But you just got to try. You definitely, if you're commissioned for a certain space, you imagine the space. But my first play I wrote blind. I mean, it wasn't a commission. I just sort of wrote it on the back of some stuff, and it sort of happened. But now I certainly do. Yeah, sorry, that wasn't.
and the I mean, there are lots of comments in the reviews of your plays about the reviewers usually try their hardest but fail to avoid the word dysfunctional, about family relationships and sort of broken family relationships. And you have heard in that face, there's a mother who has a strange relationship with a son and who is sort of out of her head a lot of the time, and a father who's off in Hong Kong and comes back to...
I think... Sorry,
yeah, go on, yeah.
I think there is a... I mean, my first three plays I see as a kind of trilogy of sort of different aspects of actually a sort of a mother and her as the monster, as the disappeared character, and then the death of her, different characters, different people, but they sort of... It's funny, you look back, you write something very quickly and quite young, and then you see that's a little pack, that's something together. But I think what interested me was the idea that, you know, money quite often disguises neglect, I think, can allow it to fester. And I think, ultimately, whether you have cash or not, or go to nice schools or not, you can sort of do quite a lot of damage to each other. And I think there's a preconception, perhaps, or I don't know, it's dangerous territory to get into, but I think that's what I was interested in, the idea that, you know, earlier I was talking about the rooms you don't go into. I think money can help create the rooms you don't go into, if that makes sense.
And do you read the reviews? Do you read reviews of your plays?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to say no, but yes.
Charlotte Bronte collected them. You're in good company. She collected them and pasted them into a book. And she made her publisher collect from round the country and send them to her. And then she boiled in indignation at them.
John Osborne, I love this. He got very upset when he got bad reviews, and he would get postcards and do that really scary serial killer type thing where you cut out letters and send these anonymous, like, hate postcards to the critics. I thought that was brilliant. Just imagine him, this sort of wonderful man.
Well, the critics are nice. They're nice to you mostly, aren't they?
They can be. I don't know, you've got to be careful. My last play had more mixed reviews than the last two. But I quite like that. I quite like the people either really liked it or really hated it. But someone once told me it's really true, is you can't believe the good because then you have to believe the bad by that rule. So I think it's worth knowing what people are saying, but you know when you're proud of it. You just know. I've been proud of some and not proud of others, but you know in your heart of hearts when it's good, and that's what matters, I think. And
I mean, one thing that the reviewers say, which I should ask you about, is noticing I mean, you say the first three are a trilogy. We haven't talked about the third one yet, actually, but they say they're a trilogy, and they're about family relationships, but in peculiarly broken and confined circumstances. And, of course, people, audiences and reviewers notice that. And, I mean, there's this line from Tusk that Eliot says, which seems a kind of good description of what your first three plays are like, actually. He says to Maggie, his sister, we have no choice but to wait. We have no choice but to hope, because that's what family is. Suffering for each other, suffering each other.
And then there's a joke directly after that no one got.
Oh, right.
She goes, Jesus Christ. And then he goes, exactly. And it would be my lone cackle every night. I looked insane because I was like, and everyone was like, it's so funny. Again, that's funny on the page. That's interesting. Actually, in the moment, it wasn't funny because everyone's like, oh, the kids, what will happen? It's interesting how it swaps, because it's a literary gag in a way. Curious.
Yeah, but and one reviewer said, I guess, boiling down what quite a few said about Tustus, I think, you know, and it was at the end of a very enthusiastic review, and the reviewer said something like, you know, reflecting on the fact that some of the concerns and material reminded him of your first play, That Face, and he said, and she's going to go on to do really good things in the future, I think, especially once she has exercised her demons. Did you read that one? And I mean, what do you? I mean, how do you sort of react to that sort of thought that somebody looking at your plays or going to your plays thinks these are the writer has made drama whose concentration on this kind of family material must come from her demons?
I think every writer gets that, especially I think. But I think your very early work, and mine was sort of terribly early and unfiltered perhaps, is going to be about stuff you're deeply, deeply interested in. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I find it irritating when people presume it's not fiction. It's almost an insult because you're like, it's a play. You can't just stick some stage directions on life. It's something, you made a thing. It's structured. It's a machine that other things can hang off. I think particularly, you know, the whole bit, the right bit of being playwright, the craft. And I find that stuff sort of makes almost the craft redundant because you made something out of nothing. Doesn't matter what happened to you, what you've seen. Everyone experiences all sorts of things. I think that misses a trick slightly.